What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the 6th album by Blood on the Dance Floor. Basically, this album came out in the late summer of 2013, and it's called Bad Blood. Now, between all the allegations and the rumors of them splitting up and that type of stuff in 2013, this was kind of a subdued album by Blood on the Dance Floor. It didn't have the sheer energy and ferociousness of 2010's Epic, or the kind of compact bite and the EDM kind of ravenous infused sound of All the Rage, but I do feel like it's particularly solid here. I am eventually going to get to Evolution. I got to get a hold of that project or figure out how I'm going to review it. But this album, I wanted to review this just because it's particularly, it has a nice kind of off the wall kind of bite here. This is kind of different in its approach. And I kind of feel like this one is not quite as heavy on like the sheer kind of dance floor vibes about this. I feel like it kind of has some trance and kind of softcore dance floor kind of vibes on here, and just amongst like other kind of topics on here that just kind of make it to where I would probably say out of the 12 songs, there's 13 songs on here, but one is like a skit that's just like 25 seconds. So I kind of feel like only about half the album is like the typical Blood on the Dance Floor from days of it's hard to be a diamond in a rhinestone world and Epic and All the Rage and some of those. I kind of feel like it's interesting because they got glossier. I definitely feel like, especially the singles like I Refuse to Sink and then Something Grim, both have like a more refined sound, where I think that they really were on the verge of becoming like an alternative festivity. It's not like they weren't already in that establishment, but in terms of at least getting on the radio and being more mainstream and that type of stuff, this is really like a pretty solitary push that really showcased them just having more refined singles and not just kind of being like internet popular and alternative popular and kind of more like this off to the side kind of popularity like they were on their earlier albums. I feel like if they had probably had like another album like this with just a few more hits on here, I probably would have said that eventually they probably would have broken even and gotten some airplay and stuff. But this is definitely an album that felt like the most refined. I definitely like the concept of just seeing what it did, even though it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of like the sheer amounts of hits. I do feel like it's got like enough gems on here to be able to say that you need to, of course, fuck with this project and see towards it. But it's just kind of the concept that I feel like when I compare like the sheer power of the singles to like some of these kind of not quite as stellar album cuts, I kind of look after it, and it's just kind of a surprise that I felt like this refinement and really the attitude that they kind of had on here. It's a sanctimonious album. It kind of has like, I don't want to say full blown religious undertones, but it just kind of feels a little bit more sanctimonious than I was expecting it to, and it just kind of deals with a lot more just kind of like almost like religious eloquence of something. I mean, it's not a horrid thing, but it just is kind of, I don't know how well it suits them. It just kind of had a lot more. It's tough to kind of find words other than sanctimonious to really describe it. It just kind of had a more, I guess, like holy-esque kind of atmosphere about it that just was kind of, it just feels a lot more religious blue blood in a lot of ways as far as that kind of goes. And there's just the combination of that plus the jadedness from the allegations that they had and just the overall critic and like critique that they had that was kind of starting to get to them a little bit on this project, just kind of dealt with something that they just were not quite as jovial and quite as peppy as they were back in 2010 and 2011. So it's just kind of, I mean, it's just a mismatch. I mean, I want to say that Eminem has kind of had those sorts of situations and other folks where it's just kind of one of those more like when you usually have like sunny day albums. I feel like this is kind of more of a rainy day album. I guess that depicts right down to the album title with it being called Bad Blood. This one just kind of has, this album just kind of has more of like a chip on its shoulder that detracts from the experience just because there's just not enough songs. Like there's just a depiction of kind of things. It's just kind of scattershot in how some of these particular songs kind of hit and connect, just because the dance floor songs are just in different vibes. But we'll get to that and I'll showcase that as we speak on it. But the singles are excellent. I mean, really, Wikipedia kind of says that there's 3 singles, but then it doesn't. It says that maybe the second single is Crucified by Your Lies, but I don't see any further information that that song actually was. So I'm just going to assume that the 2 singles were just I Refuse to Sink, Fuck the Fame, and then the second single was Something Grim. So I Refuse to Sink, Fuck the Fame is like a really kind of like pretty crazy, like close to EDM sounding kind of hit on here. It's definitely a nightclub song, and I definitely like it in like Javon's verse, and half of Davi's verse kind of has like these really kind of bubbly electronic type sounds that really sound like you're getting pretty torn up and that type of stuff. This is definitely a great song to get litty to. Definitely pound the drinks, go out to a bar, that type of stuff. Just go out to a dance club and have some fun. This is the sort of stuff on this album that this album definitely needed way more of. I mean, I feel like this is definitely one of the best, if not the best song on this album. The hook is brilliant, real catchy. This is like getting dangerously close to, I think, what would have gotten Blood on the Dance Floor airplay if they had had like a hook like this, or a song like this that could have like had a little bit more glossiness towards it. I mean, it's pretty much, I find this song to be quite excellent, but I just look after it. I think this is probably something that would have been like a street single or a promotional single for like a standard artist, and probably would have just charted on like the R&B or pop charts or dance charts or something. But I'm really surprised that this song did not even chart on the dance charts. Maybe it was because of the allegations, but it's really too bad that Blood on the Dance Floor never really got national attention where they charted, just because this was a great song, and it really feels like it's just kind of, this should have been on the Heat Seekers chart, the rhythmic charts, the dance charts like Madonna and Jennifer Lopez get to, and some of those type folks. So this is a vast surprise that this got basically no attention. It should have had a music video. I don't know if it had a music video towards it. It was just an overall excellent song, great dance hit, real crazy kind of 2013 EDM that pretty much gets crazier than a lot of EDM that was just typical in 2012 and 2013. This is definitely several notches turned up from your typical kind of EDM and stuff. The second single, Something Grim, is another brilliant one. This one just really has like a kind of like Japanese video game type feel. I like that concept. There's a lot of production on here that just kind of feels like some Japanese kind of Final Fantasy like video games and that type of stuff. This has real kind of like ambient and just kind of electronic type sounds in that sort of sense. But this is one that just kind of has like particular, this one just has particular kind of subdued kind of feel towards it. It's just kind of more of like a hazy, cloudy day type stuff. It's definitely makeshift. This is another one that was kind of aiming for mainstream, I think, and I like the concept behind it. It's just a very makeshift kind of hook where it's not necessarily like a dance club kind of song. I just kind of see it. It's not Something Grim is not necessarily a dance club song. I mean, it can be. I can definitely see it as like a slow dance, this kind of trance like song. There's something to play just in the slower moments of dancing on the dance floor and that type of stuff. But I really see this as like kind of an in the car song that you listen to. It's interesting to kind of get Blood on the Dance Floor to kind of do these blue collar gems that you would listen to after work, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock p.m. when like the sun is setting, just more in like a cloudy day. It just kind of has not so much like a chip on its shoulder, but just kind of a more a more preoccupied sense of mind. Just kind of a more preoccupied sense, and just a little bit more food for thought in terms of just stuff on your mind, just as opposed to just like the sheer kind of fury of I refuse to sink. But it's interesting to get that. I mean, this is an example where the energy is detracted, and I'm glad that Blood on the Dance Floor doesn't fall for this trap. But when they switch the energy of the single and the tempo and that type of stuff, and they go from a rave song to like a thought provoking, and where they go from like a rave song to like a more thought provoking and makeshift kind of song where they don't lose the quality of that. So it's definitely good to kind of get that as far as that kind of goes. It's just a great makeshift song by Blood on the Dance Floor. There definitely should have been more singles on this album. I just think that there was pretty much like some dismay on like Blood on the Dance Floor's mind, just because Davi's not overtly on this project. I mean, he's on here, but it seems like he does more choruses on this project, and he kind of will sometimes be on like the third verse, and you hear Javon rap a lot more, and he's more on this project than he was on like Epic or like All the Rage. I feel like there's plenty of Javon songs on here, and it's just different for Davi not having the usual kind of typical peppiness that he's known for having. This is an album that just feels a lot more subdued and just more kind of like the cloudy day album out of the ones. But that's just kind of the concept. So to talk about the songs I recommend, yeah, out of 12 songs, not counting the skit, there were 7 songs I recommend. So those 7 songs would be Unchained, I Refuse to Sink, Bad Blood, the title track, Fake is the New Trend, Damaged, Something Grim, and Redeemer. So Another song that's in the same valve as I Refuse to Sink, but just not quite as single ready and quite as chart heavy as like Fake is the New Trend. This definitely has like a particular craziness that this album needed a lot more of. This one probably pretty much turns it up in the same notch. This is like a good 1-2 punch where I feel like I Refuse to Sink and Fake is the New Trend are both some crazy ones. Just real kind of shredding up the dance floor. Just kind of gets in that same sort of pitch. Just really kind of feels. And this one's not so much well, it's kind of EDM in the chorus, but I kind of feel like this is a lot more electronic, just that sort of craziness. This is the sort of spark that this album needed way more of. And just an overall great song. This has great energy, just great pace about it. This is an easy kind of typical Blood on the Dance Floor type song. This is them back on their prime type shit, and that's as far as that context kind of goes with it. And another one like that is Bad Blood, the title track. Now, this one really feels like one that you would have a few drinks in your system. This has real kind of synthy, kind of distortedness towards it. I really like the concept of that. This is another one that's like 2010 and 2011 Blood on the Dance Floor. This one just has like a chorus just like back in the old days, and this is just like classic Blood on the Dance Floor. This is just an example of another one, just a 2013 rendition of like something that they were doing like back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. This great hook, good stuff like that. Jay Vaughn raps on here too. This gets to pretty pitched craziness, and this is definitely one to have a few drinks in your system. I feel like Fake is the New Trend, I Refuse to Sink, and Bad Blood are all some great ones for that. And another one that has like particular power to it is Unchained, the first song that you hear on this album. This is a particularly synthy song, Unchained. Definitely a great distorted one. This is another distorted one like Bad Blood. Pretty close to as crazy as that song is, but it's just more single ready. I feel like this one's more kind of airplay ready and that type of stuff. But it has like these kind of keys in the song, these sparkling keys in here. I'm not really sure what that is, but it's very catchy in how it goes. It's just very much a riveting kind of fight back and kind of defiant kind of song. I like the concept. This is an example of where Blood on the Dance Floor turns like their kind of like jaded kind of energy and just maybe not jaded, but just kind of fighting back kind of energy with the allegations that they had. This is one where it kind of bucks the system and kind of gets their swagger back for all the hate that they've gotten across the years and that type of stuff. This is just one that's very kind of rambunctious and just kind of fights back in that sort of sense as far as the context of it. It's just a really good song for that sort of thing. And it's kind of like when Eminem makes like Till I Collapse or like Lose Yourself or something like that. It just has that real spark of energy that just kind of bites back and clap back kind of energy. Then Redeemer is a particular bubbler of energy. This is another electronic synth heavy kind of one. I definitely like that concept. It's just kind of more, but this one just has more powerful lyrics. This is what I talked about with some of the sanctimoniousness that I was saying. This one's just kind of an odd topic for talking about like the chick's body being a redeemer in that sort of sense. It's a little bit kind of a differential topic to have for like a dance floor kind of song. Some of these like Divided We Fall, Behemoth, and Crucified by Your Lies kind of have some of these more kind of blue blood eloquence that's just kind of odd for that spectrum. But it is a good song. It's definitely pretty crazy as a dance floor song. It's just kind of a bubbler to kind of get things. Not quite as crazy as Bad Blood, Unchained, and Fake is the New Trend, and I Refuse to Sing. But it's just definitely a kind of a mid-tempo, just kind of nice night out kind of bubbler for like a song on this album. This is another quality hit on here. So that's pretty much about half the album. And then to talk about Damaged, and then Damage is kind of like a softcore dance club song. This is what I talked about where some of these songs go in a different direction. There's a couple on here that I don't enjoy that I'll point out, but Damage is an example of one that really kind of has like this trance kind of feel. This is definitely one that kind of feels like Japanese music like from video games in that sort of sense. This really kind of has like that kind of feel in terms of just like trance kind of music. It's interesting that Blood on the Dance Floor was trying to do this because they didn't really do this on Epic, and I don't remember them doing this that much on All the Rage. I need to mess that project more, but just to kind of say this is an example of like a song that just kind of had like not necessarily like the shrill kind of ass shaking craziness of like the normal songs that they even have on this album. It's just kind of a different pitch. But to talk about the 5 songs I didn't enjoy, like there just were some down tempo kind of dance floor songs where they don't necessarily leave the dance floor, but they just are kind of like a different tempo and just differential topics that just have a little bit more ambient or just more kind of, they just kind of have like a bit more kind of like optimism in them. Like Always and Forever and Divided We Fall are both kind of more down tempo songs that I just didn't like the pitch of those. I mean, they were still kind of in the dance floor, but I couldn't quite get into these. I feel like Damage just pulled this style off better, but these are just not necessarily dance club songs. They just have a little bit more emotional backdrop and more processive and kind of more optimistic vibe about them. That just, it's not like I don't like Blood on the Dance Floor being optimistic, but they just kind of are a little bit unctuous in that sort of sense that I just didn't quite vibe quite as wholesomely with. And then Crucified by Your Lives was just a differential. This is kind of like one of those makeshift kind of after work songs that just kind of is more starry eyed and just kind of a lot more just kind of like typical makeshift that's just not on the dance floor. It's one of the few songs that wasn't on the dance floor in some way. And I just didn't really enjoy Behemoth. I kind of feel like that one had this Behemoth just kind of had one of the more awkward beats on this album. It just was trying to be like a growling kind of dance floor song, but it just didn't quite pull it off quite as well. I kind of feel like the impact behind it just turned it into one of the more kind of just not fulfilling kind of songs on this project. Just did not quite have the energy, and it was just kind of a underwhelming and just kind of an underwhelming and not fulfilling and kind of more off to the side and just kind of atypical beat for them that just did not quite hit as hard as I would have liked it to. It's just odd because normally these album cuts by Blood on the Dance Floor, they should have stock amounts of these. If they would have had another song like Damaged or Fake is the New Trend or something like that, I definitely would have been there for it. But Behemoth was just kind of an oddball one. And then Morning Star was just kind of a motivational song that I just didn't really pick up the motivational pace for. It just didn't quite connect with me quite as well. I just was not vibing with that one. I mean, it's good to kind of get some of these motivational ones, but I just didn't pick up on the pitch of that one. It just didn't quite have as connecting of energy as I would have liked it to. I do like the fact that Blood on the Dance Floor did, in this compact amount of songs, try to include other things like Divided We Fall and like Crucified by Your Lies and some of that type of stuff. But really, they needed more songs. If they were going to do differential dance floor type vibes, they needed to take like the the template of Damage and get that, because I definitely feel like more trance songs would have definitely been great. I mean, the dance floor songs, that especially the ones that they are typical to doing, just turned out outstandingly, and it definitely created like a sort of hunger for them just because they did it so well and they were so refined by this point. But it was mostly just the differential stuff, the new stuff that they tried, and just kind of the new pitches of energy that they had, like the sanctimonious stuff that just didn't really connect that well. It's kind of created some awkward spells. So me liking 7 songs out of 12 on this album, I'm going to go ahead and give this album a 6.75 out of 10. I feel like that's good enough. I really like the singles. It has at least 6 dance club songs on here, pretty much 7 dance club songs on here that's just typical of them and has that same carnivorous energy, just in a more refined prospect. But like I said, I feel like the new stuff that they tried just didn't hit quite as well as it needed to, and it just kind of was surprising that this album was as patchy when Blood on the Dance Floor is known for being able to pack albums full of album cuts. I mean, they usually get to like the 5th, 6th, 7th single. They usually have stock amounts of album cuts, and they usually don't struggle with dance floor kind of songs, which is 3 things that they kind of did on here. That just kind of happens to be the problem. And then just the new stuff, the sanctimonious stuff, the kind of more eloquent blue blood religious kind of lyrics, and then just like other ideas that just didn't quite hit as hard, like the hustle song and like the makeshift song just didn't really work that well. So it's just kind of that sort of concept. But the social score, I'll go ahead and give like a 7.5 out of 10. I feel like a 7.5 out of 10 is pretty outstanding, just because it's the typical stuff. I mean, Blood on the Dance Floor at this point are masters of like being able to put out like quality social and outgoing nightlife weekend kind of music and that type of stuff, and they definitely had a certain refinement about it in 2013. It's just so kind of subdued and undermined and undervalued on this project. They just don't showcase it as heavily as they did in the past. Maybe it's just because the allegations, maybe they just weren't in the mood this time, maybe they just had some cloudy kind of bad days that they just weren't in the mood. But it just was kind of the concept that they missed an opportunity, because I felt like this was really a potentially chart heavy album that just didn't push through and have like the energy that it needed at this point when they were at getting close to like breaking even. So that's just kind of the problem. But in terms of the future, like Blood on the Dance Floor is broken up, so it's too bad about that. And of course they have plenty more albums, and there's a few more Javon albums I'm going to review and such, but we're just going to have to get to some more of these. But this is still a recommendable project.